Welcome to RANEPA Expert Talks, and I am happy to introduce you our today's guest, Professor Chung, who is the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And we have very special questions for Professor, which are the following. And thank you for joining us today. Yeah. What can governments do to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals?
Okay, so let me start by explaining what we mean by Sustainable Development Goals. Actually, Sustainable Development Goal is a list of long-term goals for governments to achieve. And in order to promote Sustainable Development Goals, we have to understand that the government economic or development policymaking is mainly focused on short-term management of the economy, industry, and the labor market, things like this. So government economic policy making is mainly dominated by short-term priorities. But these sustainable development goals, like climate change and water management or sustainable livelihood and protection of the environment, all these goals are very long-term in nature. They cannot be achieved right away, overnight. So the main issue is how can we close a time gap between this long-term sustainable development goal and the short-term priority, especially economic priority, industrial priority. So there is some kind of time gap between the long-term goals and the short-term priorities. So the government here has to play a very critical role of bridging the time gap, because this time gap cannot be bridged by market or private sector, because the market and the private sector's role is maximizing short-term profit and is not about long-term goals. So it's not their job. So market and the private sector is not their job to promote sustainable development goals. Their job is for short-term maximization of production profit. So here the government has to play a role bringing in regulations, standard, and the tax fiscal policy that can stimulate long-term investment. That is the role the government has to play.
I see. But anyway, can you name the best practices of business and succeeding sustainable development goals?
Yeah, okay. Even for business, as I said, the business's main goal is a short-term maximization of production and profit. But there are some big companies like Shell and the British Petroleum or Google or Apple, such kind of big companies in the world are realizing for their maintenance, sustainability of their market share, they also know that they need to invest in long-term goals. This is why some of the companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google already declared to use 100% of electricity from renewable sources. These are the kind of contributions that private sector and the business can make. But there are other also good practices from certain other governments, like especially the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries, as you know very well, they are your neighbor, Russian neighbor. Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, all these countries are presenting a very successful example of investing in environment and in the people, which are the long-term goals. And by doing that, they have been also successful in stimulating economic development as well at the same time. So when we are pushing for sustainable development goal, another very important problem or issue is many people have a question if we are focusing on investing in climate change or investing only for social development, might be just a cost and burden so that economic development might be damaged. This is a fixed perception. But in fact, the Nordic countries have proven that, according to their historical experience, by investing in education, welfare, medical expenses, all these investment or university education, free education, all these support has been successfully supporting economic development, industrial competitiveness, and innovation. Those Nordic countries, surprisingly to many people, they are #1 ranking in innovation index. They are the most innovative country in the world. Why? Because the people in Nordic country do not have to worry about their failure, because government social safety net protecting them, even though they failed, but government can protect them for their basic livelihood. So they don't have to worry about it, and that they can be more brave to come up with innovative ideas. So this is making the people and the companies in those Sweden, Finland, you can remember Nokia, Ericsson, they are the #1 countries, the most competitive country in the world. So it's very difficult to understand how come such a small country have such a competitive industry. This is a very classical example that investing in the people and the social protection, environment protection can stimulate even economic growth. So we should have a confidence and strong belief that investing in long-term goals of sustainable development can stimulate economic growth and development and job creation as well.
Well, thank you for sharing this picture, and actually very challenging picture. So we're here at RANEPA, so let's talk about the students. How should the students be trained to be focused on achieving SDGs?
Okay. So maybe my main suggestion or advice for the young students, whether it's RANEPA or wherever it is, I think we should not be only focusing on economic development theory of the current economic textbook. The current economic textbook, what I mean by that is classical economic theory about supply and demand, the balancing and the labor market or capital market, or these kind of economic principles, only teaching our students only about very, very short-term equilibrium and just a short-term maximization. But student has to learn that we should not be only focusing on short-term balance, but we have to worry about long-term development and the long-term sustainability, because the young generation, they are the ones who will live longer than us, and they should be worried about long-term goals rather than short-term economic, short-term balance. For that, I think climate change is another very important issue for them.
And what is your personal challenge for achieving the goal number 13, which is about climate change and its impact?
Okay. Yes, out of all the sustainable development goals, I think climate change stands out as one of the most critical goals that we have to focus on, because you might have already know that Australia is on fire. Australia, we see from satellite everywhere in the news, in the internet, we see the pictures of Australia on fire. It's not only just Australia. Actually, our house where we are living, the earth, is on fire. But still, while our house is on fire, we are only worrying about like digitalization, capital market, and there's all these kind of very short-term issues. But we don't realize that our house is on fire. So we have to focus on the real priorities, our survival, not only just short-term economic priorities. So we have to expand our perspective, and we have to think about how can you address this climate challenge. But it's not easy. Once again, addressing climate change means transformation of high carbon civilization towards a low carbon civilization, which is fundamentally very, very difficult, because we have been using cheap fossil fuel so far. And everything we are using now based on the cheap fossil fuel. But we have to shift away from cheap fossil fuel towards a more expensive. But now price gap is closing, but still more expensive clean energy in the future. But it is not just for saving our future or survival, but we have to realize that our transformation for clean energy can stimulate our economic growth and job creation. Everybody is worrying about how can you create more jobs, how can you have economic growth. Yes, climate change can be not only a crisis, but also at the same time, it can be an opportunity for creating jobs and economic growth as well. So we have to change our mindset and the perception that climate change, sustainable development goal, they are burden and cost. It's not true. In fact, when we take a long-term time horizon, they can be an investment for long-term job creation and economic growth.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And well, have a very good, successful work at the Gaitar Forum.
Okay.
And see you around.
Okay. Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.